The air in the courtroom was thick with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like a choice. I sat there, clutching the edge of my chair, my knuckles pale against the dark wood. Tyler stood across the room. His tie loosened just enough to look casual, like he was above it all. His lawyer was talking, but I barely heard the words. All I could focus on was the way Tyler's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and cold like a blade catching the light. "You're nothing without me," he'd said months ago during our last fight, his voice low and cruel, slicing through years of quiet doubts he'd planted in me. Those words echoed now, louder than the judge's gavel as it finalized our divorce. I'd spent 10 years with Tyler, 10 years of shrinking myself to fit into his worlds. I was 31 now, and the woman I'd been, a project coordinator with big dreams, someone who used to sketch out marketing campaigns in her notebook during lunch breaks, had faded into a ghost. I'd given it all up for him, for the marriage I thought would anchor me. Instead, it hollowed me out. Tyler's subtle jabs, his way of making me feel small, had worked their way into my bones. "You're not cut out for that corporate stuff, Emma," he'd say, pouring himself another coffee in our cramped Dallas apartment. "Stick to what you're good at, keeping things steady here." And I believed him. I stopped applying for jobs, stopped dreaming, stopped trusting the voice in my head that whispered, "I could be more, Dot." That day in the courtroom, though, something shifted. As the judge read out the terms, division of assets, no alimony, a clean break, I felt a flicker of relief, like a window cracking open in a stuffy room. Tyler's smirk faltered when he realized I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I was just done. I walked out into the Dallas heat, the sun glaring off the courthouse steps, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of his words lift, just a little. I wasn't nothing. I was Emma Rivers, and I was going to rebuild Dot. The months that followed were a blur of small, deliberate steps. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Uptown, the kind with creaky floors and a view of a parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd lie awake at night listening to the hum of the city and think about the girl I used to be. I remembered sitting on my dad's porch as a kid, the smell of his pipe tobacco curling through the air, him saying, "Emma, you've got a fire in you. Don't let anyone dim it." I'd forgotten that girl, but she was still there, buried under years of doubt. So I started digging her out. I signed up for night classes, project management, marketing strategies, anything to fill the gaps Tyler had convinced me were too big to bridge. I worked side gigs, waitressing at a diner where the coffee was always burnt, picking up freelance data entry jobs that paid just enough to cover rent. Every night, I'd sit at my wobbly kitchen table, my laptop glowing in the dark, piecing together a portfolio. It wasn't glamorous. My hands would shake sometimes, holding a pen, wondering if I was fooling myself. But Lena, my best friend, wouldn't let me quit. She'd show up with takeout, her wild curls bouncing as she plopped onto my couch, saying, "Emma, you're building something real. Don't you dare stop." Lena was a graphic designer, always scribbling ideas on napkins, always seeing the world in colors I'd forgotten existed. She'd push me to keep going, her voice steady when mine wavered. Dot. By the time I landed an interview at Pinnacle Marketing, one of the top firms in Dallas, I almost didn't believe it was real. I'd sent the application on a whim, half expecting a rejection email. But there it was, an invitation to interview for a project coordinator role. I stood in front of my mirror that morning, smoothing my dark brown hair into a low bun, my hazel eyes staring back at me. I looked capable. Not the broken woman Tyler had left behind, but someone who could walk into a glass-walled office and belong there. I chose a navy blazer, one I'd found at a thrift store, but tailored to fit me perfectly. It felt like armor. Dot. The Pinnacle building was all sleek lines and polished floors, the kind of place that hummed with ambition. I rode the elevator up, my heart pounding, clutching my portfolio like a lifeline. The receptionist smiled, her nails clicking on the keyboard as she directed me to the conference room. I took a deep breath, adjusted my blazer, and pushed open the door. Dot. And then I saw him. Dot. Tyler sat at the head of the table, his suit crisp, his posture relaxed, like he owned the room. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world tilted. That smirk, God, that smirk, curved his lips, just enough to let me know he'd been waiting for this. My stomach churned, my palms went clammy, and I could feel the old panic creeping in. The voice in my head whispering, "You're nothing." But there was no turning back. Two other interviewers sat at the table, an older man with a serious face and a woman with a tight smile, but Tyler was the one who mattered. I knew it, and he knew it. "Ms. Rivers," he said, his voice smooth, professional, but laced with something darker. "Please, have a seat." I sat, my hands folding tightly in my lap, and forced myself to meet his gaze. He leaned back, flipping through my resume like it was a prop in his little game. "So, Emma," he said, drawing out my name, "tell us about your experience. It seems you've had quite a gap in your career." The jab landed, sharp and precise, but I didn't flinch. I thought of the nights spent studying, the early mornings at the diner, the way Lena's laughter had pulled me through the darkest days. I thought of my dad's voice, steady and warm. I took a breath, steadying the tremor in my chest, and started talking. I spoke about the courses I'd taken, the freelance projects I'd completed, the way I'd learned to manage timelines and budgets under pressure. My voice grew stronger with every word, and I could see Tyler's smirk falter. Just a fraction dot. He tried again, cutting in with a question about my ability to handle high stakes environments. It was another dig, a reminder of the times he'd told me I'd crack under pressure. But I didn't waver. I described a freelance project where I'd coordinated a last minute campaign for a small business, pulling it off despite impossible deadlines. The older man, Mr. Grant, I later learned, nodded, scribbling a note. Tyler's jaw tightened dot. The rest of the interview was a blur of questions and answers, but I could feel Tyler's eyes on me, searching for a crack. He didn't find one. When it was over, Mr. Grant stood and thanked me, his expression unreadable. "We'll be in touch," he said. Tyler didn't say a word, but his silence felt louder than anything he could have said. I walked out of that room, my legs trembling but my head high. The elevator ride down was quiet, the city sprawling below me through the glass walls. I didn't know if I'd get the job, but I'd done something I hadn't thought possible. I'd faced Tyler, and hadn't let him win, dot. The days after the interview were a strange mix of hope and dread. I'd walk to the diner for my morning shift, the Dallas skyline glinting in the distance, and replay every moment in that conference room. Tyler's smirk, the way his voice had dipped when he asked about my gaps, kept looping in my mind like a song I couldn't shake. But so did the way I'd answered. Calm, steady, like the woman I was trying to become. I'd catch myself smiling sometimes, wiping down tables, the smell of burnt coffee and grease clinging to my apron. I'd done it. I'd faced him. But the waiting, the not knowing if I'd get the job, gnawed at me. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would lurch, half expecting a rejection email with Tyler's fingerprints all over it. Lena noticed the change in me, though. She came over one evening, her arms full of Thai takeout, her eyes sparkling with that contagious energy she always carried. We sat cross-legged on my living room floor, the city lights filtering through my cheap blinds, and she grilled me about the interview. "You should have seen his face, Lena," I said, picking at my pad thai. "He thought he had me. He thought I'd crumble." She grinned, tossing a peanut at me. "But you didn't. You showed up, Emma. That's the win." I wanted to believe her, but the fear lingered. Tyler still had power, didn't he? He was the manager. He could tilt the scales. I remembered a moment from years ago when Tyler and I were still dating. We'd been at a friend's barbecue, the kind with too much beer and laughter, and I'd been telling a story about a project I'd led at my old job. Everyone was listening, leaning in, and for once I felt like the center of the room. Tyler had watched me, his smile tight, and later in the car he'd said, "You don't need to try so hard, Emma. People can tell when you're faking it." I'd laughed it off then, but it stuck, a splinter I didn't notice until it festered. Now, sitting with Lena, I realized how often he'd done that, clipped my wings, then convinced me I'd never been meant to fly. A week after the interview, I was at the diner, refilling sugar containers during a slow shift, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I slipped into the break room, my hands shaking as I opened the email. It was from Pinnacle. My breath caught as I scanned the words. "We're pleased to invite you for a follow-up discussion with our senior hiring director, Mr. Grant." A follow-up. Not a rejection. Not an offer either, but something. I leaned against the wall, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and let out a shaky laugh. I wasn't done yet. The follow-up was scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with what ifs. What if Tyler had sabotaged me? What if Mr. Grant saw through my resume? Saw the years I'd lost to a marriage that had drained me dry? But as I got ready, pulling on that same navy blazer, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hazel eyes looked tired but clear, like a sky after a storm. I thought of my mom years ago, standing in our old kitchen, her hands dusted with flour as she kneaded dough. You don't have to be perfect, Emma, she'd said. You just have to show up and keep going. I straightened my shoulders. I was showing up. The Pinnacle office felt different this time, quieter, like the building itself was holding its breath. Mr. Grant's office was on the top floor, with a view of Dallas that stretched out like a promise. He was older than I'd expected, his hair silver at the temples, his desk cluttered with papers and a framed photo of a smiling family. He gestured for me to sit, his face serious but not unkind. Miss Rivers, he said, folding his hands, I wanted to talk to you privately about your interview. My stomach dropped. This was it. Either the door was opening or it was slamming shut. I nodded, my throat tight, and he continued. You performed well, exceptionally well, given the dynamics in the room. His eyes held mine steady, and I realized he knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. I've been in this business a long time, he said. I can tell when someone's playing games. Mr. Rivers's conduct during your interview raised some concerns. We've looked into it, and I'll be frank. His behavior wasn't appropriate for a manager in our firm. I blinked, my mind scrambling to catch up. Tyler had been caught, not just by me, but by someone who mattered. Mr. Grant leaned forward, his voice softening. You, on the other hand, showed composure and professionalism. That's not easy under pressure. We'd like to offer you the project coordinator position, effective immediately. The words hit me like a wave, warm and overwhelming. I wanted to cry, to laugh, to scream, but all I could do was nod and say, Thank you, Mr. Grant. I'm honored. He smiled, a small, genuine thing, and handed me a folder with the offer details. As I stood to leave, he added, One more thing. The manager position Mr. Rivers was hired for, it's being reassigned. We think you'd be a strong candidate to step into it if you're interested. I froze, my hand on the door. Me, the manager, Tyler's role. The irony was so sharp it almost hurt. I managed to smile, said I'd think about it, and walked out, my head spinning. The elevator ride down felt like floating. I'd done more than survive Tyler. I'd outshone him. I'd won Dot. But the victory didn't feel like I'd expected. As I stepped onto the street, the Dallas sun warm on my face, I felt a strange ache, like a bruise I hadn't noticed. I thought of the nights I'd spent crying after Tyler's words cut me down, the mornings I'd woken up doubting myself. I'd fought so hard to get here, but the scars were still there, tender under the surface. I walked to a nearby coffee shop, ordered a latte, and sat by the window watching people rush by. My hands wrapped around the warm cup, and I let myself feel it all, the pride, the pain, the quiet triumph. That night, I called Lena. She screamed when I told her about the job, the manager offer, all of it. Emma, you're a freaking rock star, she said, and I could hear her pacing her apartment, probably sketching something as she talked. You took everything he threw at you and turned it into this. You're unstoppable. I laughed, but my voice cracked, and she went quiet. You okay? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. I thought this would feel bigger, like I'd won some epic battle, but I just feel tired and a little sad. Lena didn't push. She just listened, the way she always did, and I was grateful for that. I thought of a summer day when we were kids, riding bikes down a dirt road, the air smelling of honeysuckle. We'd fallen, scraped our knees, and laughed through the sting. Maybe this was like that, a victory that still hurt. The next morning, I accepted the project coordinator role but asked for time to consider the manager position. I wasn't sure I wanted it, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to build something on my terms, not just step into Tyler's shadow. I started the job a week later, walking into Pinnacle with a mix of nerves and quiet confidence. My desk was in a sunny corner, with a view of the city I was starting to love again. I set down my bag, ran my fingers over the smooth wood, and noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the drawer. I opened it, my heart skipping. In neat, slanted handwriting, it read, You're not the first, Be careful. He doesn't give up easily. No signature, just those words, like a whisper from someone who'd walked my path. I sat there, the office humming around me, and felt a chill. Tyler was gone, but his shadow lingered. I folded the note and tucked it away, not sure what it meant, but knowing one thing for certain. I wasn't the woman he'd tried to break anymore. Whatever came next, I'd face it. I. The note stayed with me, a quiet weight in the back of my mind as I settled into my new role at Pinnacle. My first week was a whirlwind of meetings, spreadsheets, and learning the rhythm of the office. The team was small but sharp, a mix of young go getters and seasoned pros who moved through the glass walled conference rooms with purpose. I'd sit at my desk, the Dallas skyline stretching out beyond the window, and feel a strange mix of pride and unease. I was here doing the work I dreamed of, but that handwritten warning, "You're not the first," kept tugging at me. Like a loose thread I couldn't ignore. Every morning. I'd arrive early, the office still quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. I'd make coffee in the break room, the machine gurgling as it brewed, and think about the woman who'd left that note. Who was she? Another employee? Someone from Tyler's past? I'd catch myself glancing at my coworkers, wondering if one of them knew more than they let on. There was Sarah, the marketing assistant, who always had a quick smile but avoided eye contact during meetings. Or maybe it was someone who'd left the company, someone Tyler had pushed out the way he'd tried to push me down. My job was demanding, but exhilarating. I was coordinating a campaign for a local tech startup, pulling together timelines, budgets, and creative briefs. It felt like slipping into an old pair of shoes, worn but familiar, the kind that fit just right. I'd stay late sometimes, the office emptying out, the city lights twinkling through the windows. I'd pore over spreadsheets, my fingers tapping the keyboard, and feel a quiet thrill. Proof I was good at this, proof Tyler had been wrong. But even in those moments, the note lingered. A shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Lena came by one evening, dragging me out for tacos at a food truck near my apartment. The air was warm, thick with the smell of grilled onions and cilantro, and we sat on a curb, balancing paper plates on our knees. "You're killing it, Emma," she said, her mouth full of carne asada. "I mean, look at you. New job, new life. You're like a phoenix or something." I laughed, but it felt hollow. I told her about the note, my voice low, like I was afraid someone might overhear. Her eyes narrowed, her usual playfulness gone. "That's creepy," she said. "You think it's about Tyler? Like he's done this before?" "I don't know," I admitted, picking at a chip. "But it feels personal. Like whoever wrote it knows what he's capable of." Lena leaned back, her curls catching the glow of a streetlight. "You need to be careful, Em. Guys like Tyler don't just disappear. They hate losing." I nodded, remembering the way he looked at me in the conference room, that smirk hiding something darker. I thought of a memory from early in our marriage when I'd gotten a small promotion at my old job. Tyler had taken me out to celebrate, but his toast, "To my wife, who's trying her best," had felt like a jab, not a cheer. I'd brushed it off then, but now I saw it for what it was. Control. Wrapped in charm, back at work. I threw myself into the job, determined to prove I belonged. My team was supportive, but I could feel the weight of expectations. Mr. Grant checked in occasionally, his serious face softening when he saw my progress. "You're doing well, Emma," he said one afternoon, standing by my desk. "Have you thought about the manager role?" I hesitated, my pen hovering over a notepad. "I'm still considering it," I said. "It's a big step." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said, and walked away. I watched him go, wondering if he knew about the note, if he'd seen something in Tyler's file that I hadn't. One morning, about a month into the job, I was in the break room, stirring sugar into my coffee, when Sarah, the marketing assistant, came in. She was younger than me, maybe 25, with nervous energy that made her seem like she was always on the verge of apologizing. "Hey, Emma," she said, her voice soft as she poured herself a cup. "You settling in okay?" I nodded, smiling, but something in her tone felt off, like she was testing the waters. We chatted for a bit, small talk about the campaign, the Dallas traffic, but her eyes kept darting to the door like she was afraid someone might walk in. As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm, her grip light but urgent. "Emma, wait," she whispered. I I heard what happened with Tyler. The interview, I mean. I just be careful, okay?" My heart skipped. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She glanced at the door again, then shook her head. Nothing, just watch your back. She hurried out before I could press her, leaving me standing there, the coffee cooling in my hand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch, the note unfolded on the coffee table, its words staring up at me. Asterisk. He doesn't give up easily. I thought of Sarah's warning, the way her voice had trembled. I thought of Tyler's face in the courtroom, the way he'd leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something I couldn't hear. I'd assumed he'd move on, find another target for his games, but what if he hadn't? What if he was still out there, waiting for a chance to pull me back down? The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the note was a piece of a bigger puzzle. During my lunch break, I sat in a quiet corner of the office, my laptop open, and started searching. I typed Tyler's name into Google, adding Pinnacle Marketing in Dallas. Most of the results were generic: LinkedIn profiles, old press releases, but one caught my eye: an article from a small business journal mentioning Tyler's brief tenure at a rival firm before Pinnacle. The article was short, but it mentioned a sudden departure and internal conflicts. No details, but it felt like a clue. I kept digging, my fingers flying over the keyboard, and found a forum post buried in a career advice thread. It was anonymous, but the details were chilling. A woman describing a manager who'd undermined her at every turn, questioning her work, taking credit for her ideas. She'd left the company after he'd made her life unbearable. No names, but the timeline matched Tyler's stint at that firm. My stomach twisted. You're not the first. I thought of my dad again, his voice rough from years of smoking, saying, some people build themselves up by tearing others down. Don't let them, Emma. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. The office was quiet now, most of the team gone for the day. I walked to the window, the city sprawling below, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Tyler wasn't here anymore. He'd lost his job, his power, but he was still out there, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I thought of the woman who'd written the note, the one who'd warned me. I didn't know her, but I felt connected to her, like we'd both carried the same weight. I made a decision then, standing by that window. I wouldn't let fear control me. Not again. The next morning, I emailed Mr. Grant and accepted the manager role. It wasn't about replacing Tyler, it was about claiming my place, building something that was mine. As I hit send, I felt a quiet strength, like a fire rekindling. I tucked the note into a drawer, not as a reminder of fear, but as a promise to myself. I'd keep going, no matter what came next. Taking on the manager role felt like stepping onto a tightrope, exhilarating, terrifying, and no room for missteps. The first day in my new office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows, I stood there staring out at the Dallas skyline, the sun glinting off the distant buildings. My desk was bare except for a laptop, a stack of folders, and a small potted plant someone from HR had left as a welcome gift. I ran my fingers over its leaves, soft and waxy, and thought of my mom's garden back home, the way she'd hum while pruning her roses. Plants teach you patience, she'd say, her hands covered in dirt. You can't rush growth. I smiled, wondering what she'd think of me now, running a team at a firm like Pinnacle. The job was a leap from the project coordinator. Suddenly, I was leading meetings, signing off on budgets, and mentoring a team of 8. Most of them were younger than me, eager but green, their eyes wide as I walked them through campaign strategies. I'd catch myself doubting, wondering if I was ready, if I'd overstepped by taking Tyler's place. But then I'd remember the note, those words in sharp ink. Asterisk. He doesn't give up easily. It wasn't just a warning about Tyler, it was a reminder that I couldn't give up either. So I showed up every day, my navy blazer swapped for sharper suits, my hair pulled back, my voice steady, even when my nerves weren't. Sarah, the marketing assistant, became my shadow. She'd linger after meetings, offering to help with reports or grab coffee. I liked her. She was quick, detail-oriented, but there was something guarded about her, like she was always holding back. I kept thinking about her warning in the break room, the way her hand had trembled on my arm. One afternoon, as we were reviewing a client pitch, I decided to test the waters. The office was quiet, most of the team at lunch, and we were alone in the conference room, papers spread across the table. Sarah, I said, keeping my tone casual, you mentioned something about Tyler a while back. About being careful. What did you mean? Her pen froze mid scribble, and for a moment, she didn't look up. Then she forced a smile, too tight to be real. Oh, just office gossip, she said, her voice high. I heard he was intense, that's all. She started shuffling papers, her movements quick, like she was trying to outrun the conversation. I didn't push, but I didn't believe her either. There was something she wasn't saying, something that felt tied to the note still tucked in my desk drawer. That evening, I met Lena for drinks at a bar downtown, a cozy place with low lights and jazz playing softly. She was sketching on a napkin as usual, her fingers smudged with ink. You're a big shot now, Em, she teased, sliding a margarita toward me. Manager of the year, huh? I laughed, but my mind was elsewhere. I told her about Sarah, about the way she dodged my question. Lena's brow furrowed, her playful vibe fading. You think she wrote the note? She asked, leaning in. I shrugged, tracing the rim of my glass. Maybe, or maybe she knows who did. Either way, it's like Tyler's still here, haunting me. Lena reached across the table, squeezing my hand. He's not haunting you, Emma. You're just healing. It takes time. Her words hit me hard, stirring up a memory of my dad, sitting on his porch swing, his pipe glowing in the dusk. Life's not about avoiding the scars, he'd said once, after I'd come home crying over a high school breakup. It's about learning to carry them. I sipped my drink, the lime sharp on my tongue, and wondered if I'd ever stop carrying Tyler's shadow dot back at work. I started noticing small things. A report I'd finalized would have errors I didn't remember making. A client email would get lost in the system, only to turn up days later. Nothing big enough to raise alarms, but enough to make me question myself. I'd double check my work, my stomach nodding, wondering if I was slipping. One morning, I found a sticky note on my monitor with a single word asterisk careful, asterisk no signature, same handwriting as the first note. My heart pounded as I slipped it into my drawer with the other. Someone was watching me, warning me, but why? And why now? I decided to talk to Mr. Grant. His office was a safe haven, cluttered but calm, the air smelling faintly of old books. I knocked lightly, my palms sweaty. Emma, he said, looking up from his desk, his glasses perched on his nose. Everything okay? I hesitated, then told him about the notes, keeping my voice steady. I didn't mention Sarah or my suspicions about Tyler, just the messages, their cryptic warnings. He listened, his face unreadable, then leaned back in his chair. This is concerning, he said. We take workplace safety seriously. I'll have HR look into it discreetly. In the meantime, keep me posted. I nodded, grateful but unsettled. As I left his office, I caught Sarah watching me from across the hall, her expression blank. I smiled, trying to act normal, but my mind was racing. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering through my window, and pulled out the notes again. I studied the handwriting, the way the letters slanted, searching for clues. I thought of Tyler's face in the interview, the way he'd leaned forward, trying to rattle me. I thought of the forum post I'd found, the woman who'd left her job because of a manager who sounded too much like him. You're not the first dot asterisk. The next day, I decided to confront Sarah. I waited until the end of the day when the office was emptying out and asked her to stay behind to review a timeline. She agreed, her movement stiff, like she knew something was coming. We sat in the conference room, the lights dim, the city humming below. Sarah, I said, my voice soft but firm. I found another note. Same handwriting. If you know something, please tell me. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she'd bolt. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. It was me, she whispered. I wrote them. I leaned back, my breath catching. Why? I asked. She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. Tyler. He worked at my last job, before Pinnacle. He was my manager. He made things hard, took credit for my work, made me feel like I was nothing. When I heard he was here and then gone, I thought, maybe you'd gotten him out. But then I heard he's been asking about you, calling old coworkers, digging into your work here. Her voice broke. I just wanted to warn you. My heart sank, but not from fear, from recognition. Sarah's story was mine, mirrored in someone else's pain. I reached out, touching her arm. Thank you, I said, for telling me, and for the notes. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and I felt a strange bond, like we'd both survived the same storm. I thought of Lena, of my parents, of the people who'd carried me through. I wasn't alone, Dot, that night. I sat on my balcony, the air cool, the city alive below. I didn't know what Tyler was planning, but I knew I wouldn't let him win. Not again. I thought of my mom's roses, the way they bloomed despite the thorns. I'd keep blooming too, no matter what. Sarah's confession lingered in my mind like the aftertaste of bitter coffee. I sat at my desk the next morning, the office buzzing around me, but all I could think about was her words. He's been asking about you. Tyler was out of Pinnacle, out of my daily life, but he was still circling like a hawk, waiting for the right moment to dive. I glanced at the drawer where I kept the notes, their slanted handwriting a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Sarah had carried the same weight, and maybe others had too. The thought made my chest ache, but it also sparked something else, a determination to not just survive, but to protect what I'd built. I threw myself into work, leaning into the manager role with everything I had. The tech startup campaign was picking up steam, and I was in constant motion. Meetings with designers, calls with clients, late nights tweaking presentations. My team was starting to trust me, their initial wariness giving way to respect. I'd catch them nodding during my briefings or laughing at my dry humor when I'd point out a typo in a draft. It felt good, like I was finally stepping into a version of myself I'd buried years ago. But every now and then, I'd feel that prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was watching, waiting for me to slip. I started paying closer attention to the little things, the misplaced reports, the lost emails. I set up a system to track my work, saving every draft, logging every change. It was tedious, but it gave me a sense of control. One afternoon, while reviewing a budget spreadsheet, I noticed a discrepancy, a line item for a vendor we hadn't approved. It was small, easy to miss, but it didn't add up. I called Sarah into my office, keeping my tone light. Hey, did you input this vendor data? I asked, pointing at the screen. She frowned, shaking her head. No, I haven't touched that file. That's weird. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of fear, like she was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't an accident. I reported it to IT, framing it as a glitch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to Tyler. I remembered a moment from our marriage early on, when I'd found a credit card statement with charges I didn't recognize. Tyler had brushed it off, saying it was a mix-up, but his smile had been too sharp, like he was daring me to push. I hadn't then, but I was different now. I wasn't going to let him play games with my life anymore, Dot. That evening, I met Lena at a diner, the same one where I'd worked those grueling morning shifts. The smell of burnt coffee hit me as I walked in, stirring memories of wiping down sticky counters, my hands raw from dishwater. Lena was already there, sketching on a placemat, her curls tucked behind her ears. You look like you're carrying the world, Em, she said, sliding a milkshake toward me. I sighed, telling her about the spreadsheet, Sarah's confession, the nagging sense that Tyler was still pulling strings. She listened, her pen still, her eyes narrowing. You need to shut this down, she said. He's not worth your peace. She was right, but it wasn't that simple. I thought of my dad years ago, sitting me down after I'd failed a math test I'd studied weeks for. Sometimes, Emma, he'd said, his voice rough but kind, the fight isn't about winning, it's about proving you're still standing. I'd been standing ever since the divorce, but now I needed to do more. I needed to end this. Dot. The next day, I went to Mr. Grant. His office was as cluttered as ever, a stack of folders teetering on his desk. I told him about the spreadsheet, the notes, and Sarah's story, keeping my voice calm but firm. I think Tyler's trying to interfere, I said. I don't have proof, but the patterns, they're not random. Mr. Grant leaned back, his fingers steepled, his face serious. This is serious, Emma, he said. We've had concerns about Mr. Rivers before. His departure wasn't just about the interview. He paused, choosing his words. There were complaints from other employees. Patterns, as you said. We're already investigating, but I'll escalate this. If he's contacting staff or tampering with systems, we'll find out. I nodded, relief mixing with unease. As I left his office, I felt a weight lift, but only slightly. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights casting shadows across my living room. I pulled out my old notebook, the one I'd used years ago to sketch campaign ideas. Flipping through it, I found a page where I'd scribbled a quote from a college professor. Success is the best revenge. I'd laughed at it then, but now it felt true. Every project I led, every meeting I ran was a step away from Tyler's shadow. A week later, Mr. Grant called me into his office. His face was grim, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "We've traced the spreadsheet issue," he said. "It came from an external login, tied to an account we've linked to Mr. Rivers. He's been accessing our systems through a back door, likely from his time here." My heart pounded. "What happens now?" I asked. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "We're pursuing legal action. This is a breach of contract and potentially criminal. You don't need to worry, he won't be a problem anymore." I walked out, my head spinning. Tyler had been caught again, but this time it felt final. I thought of Sarah, of the woman from the forum post, of the others he'd hurt. I wanted to find them, to tell them it was over, but I didn't know how. Instead, I went back to my office, closed the door, and cried, not from sadness, but from the release of carrying something so heavy for so long. I thought of my mom, kneading dough in her kitchen, saying, "You keep going, Emma, that's how you grow." The weeks that followed were quieter. The campaign launched successfully, earning praise from the client and a nod from Mr. Grant. Sarah opened up more, her nervous energy easing as we worked together. One day, she brought me a coffee, unprompted, and said, "I'm glad you're here, Emma. You're different, in a good way." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. I was different, not perfect, but stronger, like a tree that's weathered a storm. I kept the notes in my drawer, not as a warning anymore, but as a reminder of what I'd overcome. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking out at the Dallas skyline, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, and feel a quiet peace. Tyler was gone, his shadow fading, but I wasn't naive. Life wasn't a fairy tale, and scars didn't vanish. But they could become part of you, like lines in a story you'd learn to tell with pride. I was still writing mine, and for the first time, I liked where it was going. The Dallas skyline glowed in the soft light of dusk, a canvas of oranges and pinks that felt like a quiet promise. I stood by my office window, my hands resting on the sill, the glass cool against my fingertips. The notes in my drawer, Sarah's warnings, Tyler's shadow, they were still there, but they felt lighter now, like stones smoothed by a river. I'd spent so long fighting to prove I wasn't nothing, and somewhere along the way I'd started to believe it. Not just believe it, feel it deep in my bones, like the warmth of my mom's kitchen, or the steady cadence of my dad's voice. I wasn't the woman who'd sat trembling in that courtroom a year ago. I was Emma Rivers, and I was enough. The campaign's success had shifted things at Pinnacle. My team was thriving, their confidence growing with every project we tackled. I'd walk into meetings, my heels clicking on the polished floor, and feel their eyes on me, not with doubt, but with trust. Sarah, especially, had blossomed. She'd started speaking up in meetings, her ideas sharp and bold, her nervous energy replaced by a quiet strength. Watching her reminded me of myself, clawing my way back from the doubts Tyler had planted. I'd catch her eye sometimes, and we'd share a small smile, a silent nod to the storm we'd both weathered. But Tyler's shadow hadn't faded completely. Mr. Grant's investigation had uncovered more than just the spreadsheet tampering. Tyler had been contacting former colleagues, spreading subtle rumors about my work, my competence, even my personal life. It was petty, desperate, but it stung. I'd lie awake some nights, the city humming outside my apartment, and wonder why he couldn't let go. I thought of a moment from our marriage, a quiet Sunday morning when I'd found him staring out our window, his jaw tight. "You don't get it, Emma," he'd said, his voice low. "I need to be the one who matters." I hadn't understood then, but I did now. His need to control, to diminish, came from a hollow place inside him, a fear that he'd never be enough without tearing others down. The legal action Mr. Grant mentioned moved slowly, as these things do. Tyler faced charges for unauthorized system access, a breach that could cost him more than just his reputation. I didn't follow the details closely. Part of me didn't want to give him that much space in my head. But one morning, as I was sipping coffee in the break room, Mr. Grant stopped by, his face serious but calm. "It's over, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Tyler settled out of court. He's agreed to cease all contact with Pinnacle staff and pay a fine. He's also been blacklisted from most firms in the city." He paused, studying me. You did the right thing, bringing this to me. I nodded, my throat tight. It wasn't the dramatic showdown I'd once imagined. No courtroom confrontation or public shaming. It was quieter, more final. A man who thrived on power stripped of it, left to face his own emptiness. I thought of Sarah, of the woman from the forum post, of the others whose names I'd never know. This wasn't just my victory, it was theirs too. I thanked Mr. Grant, my voice steady, and went back to my desk, the weight of the notes in my drawer lifting just a little more dot. Life after that settled into a rhythm that felt new but familiar, like a song I'd forgotten the words to but could still hum. I'd wake early, make coffee in my tiny apartment, the smell filling the air as I watched the city come alive. I'd drive to work, the Dallas skyline rising against the morning sky, and feel a quiet pride. My team grew stronger, our campaigns earning praise that echoed beyond Pinnacle's walls. I started mentoring Sarah officially, helping her navigate her own ambitions, and it felt like paying forward the strength Lena had given me. Lena, of course, was my constant. She'd show up at my place with pizza or drag me to art galleries, her laughter filling the gaps where my doubts used to live. One evening, we sat on my balcony, the air cool, the city lights twinkling below. She was sketching on a napkin, as always, her fingers smudged with charcoal. You know, Em, she said, not looking up, you're not just surviving anymore, you're living. I smiled, sipping my wine, and thought of a childhood memory. Running through a field with her, the grass tickling my knees, the sun warm on my face. We'd been fearless then, and maybe I was finding that girl again. I kept in touch with my parents, calling them every Sunday. My mom would talk about her garden, her voice bright as she described her roses. My dad, quieter now, his health fading, would listen, then say, I'm proud of you, Emma. You're tougher than I ever was. Those calls grounded me, reminding me of the roots that held me steady. I'd think of my mom's hands dusted with flour, or my dad's pipe smoke curling in the air and feel a warmth that no amount of Tyler's poison could touch. One day, about 6 months after the settlement, I was clearing out my desk drawer, organizing the chaos of sticky notes and pens. I found the two notes Sarah had written, their edges worn from handling. I sat back holding them and realized I didn't need them anymore. They'd been a lifeline, a warning, but now they were just paper ink, a moment from a past I'd outgrown. I thought of burning them, something dramatic to mark the end, but that wasn't me. Instead, I tucked them into an envelope and wrote a single word on it. Asterisk enough. Asterisk. I mailed it to Sarah, no explanation. Just a quiet thank you for her courage, for helping me find mine. The next morning, I walked into Pinnacle, the office alive with the hum of work. Sarah was at her desk, the envelope in her hands, her eyes bright with tears. She didn't say anything, just nodded, and I knew she understood. We were both free, not just from Tyler, but from the fear he had tried to chain us to. I went to my office, the sun streaming through the windows, and opened my laptop. There was a new project waiting, a big one, with a client who'd specifically requested me. I smiled, my fingers hovering over the keys, ready to dive in .A's. The months turned into a year. I found myself changing in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just the woman who'd survived Tyler. I was someone new, someone who laughed easier, who trusted her own voice. I'd walk through Dallas, the city's energy pulsing around me, and feel like I belonged. I'd stop at coffee shops, savoring the bitter warmth of an espresso, or drive past the courthouse where it all began, its steps no longer heavy with memories. I was building a life, not just a career, and it felt like a gift I'd given myself. One evening, I stood on my balcony, the air crisp, the skyline a tapestry of light and shadow. I thought of the girl I'd been, sketching dreams in a notebook, and the woman I'd become, standing tall despite the cracks. I thought of Tyler, somewhere out there. His world smaller now, his power gone. I didn't hate him anymore. That was another gift I'd given myself. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness for the man who'd never know what it meant to build without breaking others. I leaned against the railing, the metal cool under my hands, and closed my eyes. The city hummed below, alive and endless. I thought of my mom's roses, blooming despite the thorns, and my dad's words about carrying scars. I'd carry mine always, but they didn't define me. I was Emma Rivers, and I was writing my own story, one where I wasn't just enough, but more than I'd ever dreamed. I opened my eyes, the skyline stretching before me, and whispered one word into the night: enough.